right, everybody. So today we are back with another Q&A with Abel Chabai. How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. This is, I believe, our ninth Q&A. They seem to be pretty successful, so I think we'll just
Yeah,
keep
yeah.
doing them.
How
So
convenient.
yeah, we'll jump right into it. So this one is from Martin. Have you considered doing your next experiment on how little you can train and maintain your muscle? The more I think about it, I wonder how much training is a waste of time when you get beyond noob gains.
Uh-huh.
As you said in your last pod about the guys who trained with in the beginning. They had barely trained and they still have a lot of muscle years on. Would perhaps one full body session, one set, push, pull, hinge, squat once a week, keep everything. I'm inclined to think a lot less frequency, then that would work. Maybe out to once a month. Okay, so basically, yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people have thought about. I can start if you're cool. So there was a study somewhat recently, and I talked about it a couple times now, where they had people, I believe it was, I don't know if it was, sometimes they do it where it's like under 65 and over 65, but basically a younger group had maintained on 1/9 of the volume and actually gained on 1/3 of the volume that they were doing. And the older group maintained on 1/3 of the volume. And I think they lost a little bit on 1/9. So all that to say that you can do a lot less volume to maintain. And sometimes I'll even hear people say things like, oh, well, they'll be correct in the concept and they'll say, yeah, well, you could actually maintain a lot less. I bet I would maintain 90% of my muscle if I just trained 2 days a week. And I think, no, I think you'd maintain 98% of your muscle with 1 to 2 full body sessions per week. Like I think it's way more. Now I'm not talking like again enhanced lifters. It gets different because there's obviously the whole enhanced side of it, right? But a natural lifter who's been doing this for 20 plus years, I think if they went to literally one full body session with 3 sets per body part per week, they would maintain at least 95% of it. And given as an example, I see of people who barely train, like my brother's legs are still way, like they look way thicker than mine. And
Mm.
he hasn't worked out in like 2 years. Now he's heavier. So the higher body fat is also in a sense almost like a stimulus there. But yeah, I do think you could reduce it dramatically. And then just real quick, do I think that more training is a waste of time beyond noob gains? No, absolutely not, because this is maintenance. But I think if anything, you might need more stimulus to get that, to continue getting the results after those first few years. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to peak out your natural muscle potential, I do think that you will probably need some more stimulus and more training. And I would not recommend just the one or twice a week.
Yeah, I'm actually sort of doing that now because I'm really so I was focusing on my back a lot this past year in general. As you know, like I'm always sending you like the different pull down variations and whatever in our little WhatsApp group. Um, and but even more recently, I kind of just took it to a next level because I also wanted to focus a bit more on arms. So now it's two things that I'm really focusing on. And I was just thinking to myself that, okay, I just need more mental energy, if nothing else. So I started skipping lower body stuff and in particular quad stuff more and more. And I mean, I always sort of make the commitment that, okay, I'll do at least 6 sets, like 2 times a week, 3 sets of some squat pattern. I surely can commit to that, but to be honest, half the time I even skipped that.
Mm.
So probably for the last, I don't know, like 2 months, my average quad volume was around like 3 or 4 sets per week. And yeah, I didn't lose anything, although I wouldn't expect if you do very minimal work to lose anything at this point, especially because those are pretty high quality movements that I'm doing. But I'm curious how long or when will it be that I actually notice some shrinkage, if at all. Um, and yeah, I
You said you
think,
noticed some calf loss, right? After stopping calf training entirely.
yeah. Oh, yeah. But that was complete stoppage. So
Yeah.
that was, um, which is kind of, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess in a way that's gratifying that because it also means that the calf training I did before at least did
Worked.
something.
Right, right. Must be nice.
Yeah. Um, but visually, to be honest, I really don't. I really don't see that. There are some angles where I just got like a big mirror in my little gym room here, so I spend a lot of time checking myself out from the back, which I couldn't do so far. Very cool. And like there are some angles where it seems like, man, like I actually have quite kind of thin legs. Like, is this like I shouldn't wear shorts that often? But then at other times, if I see myself on video or something, I'm like, oh, okay, like it seems like it's still as it was. So
Thin legs,
yeah,
like thin calves.
yeah. And so sometimes it actually seems like I might be falling for the like in those angles, like I'm actually getting into like the chicken leg territory, like relative to upper body, which is like for most people, it's not never really a concern in most cases,
Hmm.
because their upper body is just not gonna get that big. But and it's so it's not a concern in my case either. It's just there were some moments where I got scared, um but I don't know. But in particular the calves, like sometimes they look smaller, sometimes they just don't. But there is measurable loss for sure.
Yeah, yeah. What was it? 15 and a quarter down to like 15 or something. I mean, it wasn't like huge.
Yeah. So it was like it was basically exactly like my arms. It was 38 between 38 and 40 depending on how fat I got, basically. And I mean
Centimeters for
centimeters.
those in the US. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, 15 to 16 basically. And now it's a bit below 15 inches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Um, so basically, I think we mostly agree. It's, you can certainly do a lot less, but I would not, I would use that as a, hey, I'm super busy. I just started a new job or just had a kid or, whatever, but not certainly I would not consider that ideal.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So from John, can we get a screenshot of your split? I'd love to see it. So
Ooh.
mine is a little bit complicated. So if people want to pause the video and kind of like write this down. So day one, upper, day two, lower. That's it. Rinse and repeat. So I train 3 or 4 days a week. It's literally just an upper lower split. I do 6 exercises roughly. Each one is about 3 sets. So I alternate opposing muscle groups. And that's basically it. So it'll be chest and back alternating, shoulders and back, more of like a vertical versus a horizontal pull for back, and then biceps, triceps. And then lower body, I actually start with some isolations there because I have specific reasons. I don't want to go as heavy on like squats or deadlifts or leg press anymore. But so I'll do leg extension, alternate with leg curls, which is always really annoying at my busy gym because it's impossible to get two things at once, even if they're right next to each other. And then I'll sometimes even do like the adduction and abduction. I don't know if it's really ever done anything for me. It's just another thing to kind of fatigue and get more volume because I don't want to go as heavy on those big compounds anymore. And then it's a leg press, still doing the right calf ongoing. And that's it. It's really nothing complicated. I've certainly thrown in plenty of things within that structure, like rest pause, extreme stretches, drop sets. Obviously, when I was working with Steve Hall, it was a lot more volume. That 6 months, it was 5 days a week and probably twice as much volume, but I didn't notice any difference, which, not to get too ranty, but sometimes it really does even surprise me. Like you think, how could all this extra work not do anything? But it's just, that's my experience.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a big conversation, but obviously you talked about it a lot. But um, I always also find it super interesting, and also, of course, makes me question just what is actually going on. So when you do something for 6 months and that's your experience, if we were to look under the hood with a, I don't know, like not even a microscope, but observe things that I don't think we can actually observe. Is it actually nothing happening, or some things are actually in motion? It's just it takes even longer to manifest, or
Mhm.
you would need to gain more weight for that to manifest, or like what is actually going on, or your muscles are literally like okay, like this idiot is keep banging at us, but no, that's it. Like just leave us alone. Like it's yeah, lots of interesting stuff that are cool to talk about, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you want to just, I mean, you kind of already said it, but your general split and maybe even during like a more ideal training
Yeah.
time for you.
Yeah. So currently what I'm doing is, because I'm focusing on my like everything on my back basically a lot. So that's priority number one, because that was a legit legging area. Now less so, but I want to bring it up a lot more if I can. And then arms. Um, I basically have 3 different days. So I don't really have training days, but I have training days for my back. So because that's
Okay.
priority number one. So I start every workout with like one of 3 types of pulls, like either like a vertical-ish narrow or shoulder width. So that could be a chin up, or like a narrower grip pull down, or a one arm pull down, even like a close grip, like lap prayer or pullover type motion.
Mm.
And then I have a wide grip vertical-ish day. So that would be wide grip pull down, wide grip pull up, those sorts of things. And then I have a horizontal pull day. So that would be like all kinds of chest supported row variations. But 2 actually. I have 2 pretty cool machines in my gym that I enjoy. And so I rotate through those. So it's basically ABC for the back, ABC, ABC. And then for the arms, I do biceps one day, triceps the other. So it's just like AB, AB. And then for presses, just to make sure that, because I enjoy pressing movements, I'm pretty good at them compared to pulls, and I'm prone to overdoing it. So I just have vertical, horizontal, vertical, horizontal. So I usually do like dumbbell bench presses on the horizontal, or some kind of a chest press machine, and then dumbbell overhead presses or some kind of an overhead press machine, sometimes like a cable overhead press. So I have an AB for those as well. And to some extent I rotate those independently. So sometimes I will skip chest work, and then
Mm.
I'm just going to move that to the day after. So basically then maybe up until then it was like, when it's A day for the back, it's A day for the chest, or the presses. Now it's going to shift a little bit. So it's going to be day A for the presses is going to be on day B for the back. So it's these 3 things that I'm rotating independently, and then everything else. So lower body work, and I don't know, like, well, I mean, what else is there really? Yeah,
What
like go on.
do you find that by doing that, it kind of affects your strength? Like for me, one of the reasons I try to keep things super consistent is because if I were to do this chest exercise and then a different one, or even if I change rep ranges, that can really throw off how I gauge my other work. So if you have these
Yeah.
things not really consistent each time, do you find that the strength is inconsistent?
So interestingly, I don't, and that's because, so I do try to keep things consistent as far as how frequently I hit them, at least. So I have this Fit Notes app, which maybe it's already available on iOS. So far, it was only Android. I don't know, but it's a free app that's really cool. So I can see on each lift. So when I pull it up and I see, like, let's say 15-degree incline bench press, I see how many days ago I did it last. So based on that, it's like, okay, should I do it today or not? And I'm not being random with anything. So like the exercise selection is consistent. So I'm pretty particular about not introducing new random movements. So I'm not freestyling things anymore. And so probably on some things my strength does get affected, but because I have a very clear priority list, like everything else gets shifted around those priority things. So I'm not going to do anything like randomly or to make it more convenient for myself that might affect one of my pulls, for example. And or for example, I put it like I do. So as I said, I skip quad work a lot, but I do my hinges every week, twice a week, because it also hits the lower back really well. Um, but I'm going to kind of move them around pretty flexibly depending on how recovered I feel my lower back is. And then if I have if I have a feeling that, okay, if I move it here, then yeah, I mean, it would be convenient, but then it's going to affect my other back exercises. Then I'm not gonna do that because those are still a priority. So I'm freestyling it a little bit, but never in a way where I feel like it could affect those priority things. My chest and pressing, so overhead pressing and chest pressing movements are probably not quite ideally rotated, but that's not really a priority because honestly, like this whole front area is not a lagging area. It could be better, but if I don't improve them for the next couple of months, I guess I can live with that.
Yeah, sure.
It was probably way too long-winded of an answer. Sorry.
No, it's just interesting. It's a lot to keep track of, I guess, but obviously for you doing it for yourself, it's more intuitive.
Yeah. I mean, it's the thing is, I would love a very like consistent workout schedule and workout rotation. It's just that like sometimes I go to the gym and literally the first 4 lifts I would want to do are all taken, all the equipment, and then I'm like, fuck, like am I gonna like walk on the treadmill until then, or like sometimes I need to be a little bit more flexible.
Yeah. Since going to my newer gym, I unfortunately have stopped liking the gym as much. I think we might have talked in the Facebook group a little bit, but the main reason I want to get a bigger place is just for a home gym because it's just so annoying going there and their hours are iffy. There was one day I went and I was working late. I got there at 6:30 and then I found out that the gym was closing at 7. I was just like, oh my God, I did like 2 sets. That was it. So,
Yeah.
but it's usually pretty crowded.
Yeah.
So
Couldn't you buy like a giant van or something and just put a home gym in there, and then like even if you move in the future or something, you can just take the gym with you very easily.
I don't know how much that would cost. It's like a giant trailer or something like the Rock has.
Yeah. I mean, that would be
Yeah.
a lot. That's like a
Yeah.
new house, probably.
Probably. I mean, you could probably, I don't know, if you just got like some dumpy one, probably not the best place to work out in. Also don't know where I would store it, but
Yeah.
all right. So I'm not even sure how to pronounce his name. Hung something. All right. So Hung asked, hey Dave, I've watched quite a bit of your content, had a question. I think you mentioned that lower to moderate volume works better for you than high volume. What were your signals that helped you come to that realization? Also, when in your 18 years of training, did you notice a halt in visual differences in gains, or did you notice small improvements, or do you still notice small improvements to your physique? So I'll answer the second one first. That's a little bit easier. So I stopped noticing clear changes around 25 to 26 years old. So at that point, I had very consistent training for about 12 years. If I look back at pictures, my best pictures were taken probably summer of 2020, but that was simply because I got leaner than I had been before. I would not say that I had more muscle or anything like that. And of course, you can see yourself and think, "Oh, wow, I'm looking pretty good." But I think if you look at old pictures and you're like, "Oh, it was kind of similar to this time to that time." So as far as actual tangible differences, yeah, I would say about 12 years in is where I stopped noticing that. And now it's mostly like, well, maybe I'll try to get even leaner than I was before, or I'll try to get stronger at this exercise or that exercise, but they're not really measurable differences. At 200 pounds, I have about 17-inch arms, bench press 225 for 15. I've done a little bit more than that, but I'm just saying like that's kind of just where I'm at about that weight. So things have been more or less constant. As far as the first question, I would not say that I found low to moderate necessarily works better for me than higher volume, more just that I didn't notice any benefit from going higher. So I just not found that if I go above maybe 8 to 10 sets per week for a given body part, much changes. One good evidence of this was back maybe 2018. Omar Isuf put out a pull-up specialization program. And so ultimately, between all the pull-ups and some other back work, I was doing about 30 sets per week of back. And it was the same time I was dealing with some chest issues. Never tore it, but it just kind of felt a little off. So I was doing basically 2 to 4 sets per week of chest. And over that 6 week phase, I gained just as much strength in my incline dumbbell bench, which is the only thing I was doing, compared to even my pull-ups, which I was literally doing a specialization program for. Like it just wasn't. Now again, this is 6 weeks. This wasn't over a year or anything. But I've done other higher volume routines. I've done like when I was training my neck, I had done it up to 3 sets for extension, 3 sets for flexion, and then even some side flexions 3 times a week. Didn't really notice it helped anything compared to when I was just doing once a week. Just a number of examples over the years where I just can't say I noticed much of a difference. But it's not that I would say the lower volume was personally better for me, although you do hear that too. People say they were doing tons of volume or like jump volume. I think in that case, when they go to lower volume, it's oftentimes that they're actually pushing harder because they know that they can only do those few sets versus, they're kind of doing lackluster training if they're doing 20 sets per week sometimes.
Yeah, and do you think that do you think that hypertrophy wise, maybe there was a benefit, but it was just like over so long of a time frame that it's tough to tell, or you didn't do it for long enough to actually observe it? The reason I'm saying that is actually a client, not a client. I did a consultation with someone like 2 weeks ago, and the guy asked me a very good question, which I'm surprised that we never actually really talked about this. That when people say that I noticed that this works better for me than this, how can they actually tell? Because like these things are so like protracted over a very long time frame that it's really hard to detect changes. Like this method works better than this, and especially if you gain, let's say, 5 pounds of muscle doing things one way, and to be honest, most people don't gain 5 pounds of muscle doing things one way. By the time they gain 5 pounds of muscle, usually things will have changed a few times. But let's say they do, if then they try something else and it works worse or not, or just as well. I mean, it's not, if it works just as well, you could argue that it actually worked better because every additional pound of muscle is harder to gain, right, than the previous, because you're closer to your ceiling. And in the same way, if it works worse, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually worse method for you. It could just mean that, well, things are slower. And oftentimes even the people, like your Jeff Alberts interview was a good example of that. Like I've so many times that I've heard from Eric Helms, often he was actually kind of getting pissy about it, that people talk about Jeff's low volume, but then they assume that he hasn't tried high volumes. And yeah, I'm assuming that people like them, they're very systematic. They run a particular method for a long time, and then they, optimize it, and then they try something else and like compare notes and whatever. And the way then how they describe what they actually did is like, well, I mean, that's for one, that's just one method of implementing, let's say, high volume in this case. Secondly, I mean, it's not that surprising that didn't work that amazingly for you. I mean, what if you did this or that or whatever? Like Eric, when he lost muscle on lower volumes, right? That anecdote as well. So even the smartest, most experienced people, oftentimes they're not that meticulous and systematic with how they are evaluating what works best for them. So that's just something to keep in mind. This was not addressed to you as like you should have done your experiment better. Is more just a general.
No, it's a super valid point. So this podcast will likely be released probably on the 8th of October, later today. So last week, if you're listening to this, will have been the podcast with Milo Wolf. And we talk about that exactly, which is to say, how do you know what caused a change? I mean, most of the time you don't. And, we were kind of talking about this with Brian in our chat, and he was saying, well, I don't think anything can even make a 5% difference now. And I clarified with him what he was saying was, if he has, let's say, 100 pounds of lean body mass, or 100 pounds of muscle, whatever, let's say 5% better would be 105 pounds. But that's very different than saying, okay, if I'm going to gain 1 pound of muscle this year, a certain method could make me gain 1.05 pounds of muscle this year, sure, there's plenty of methods that could potentially be 5% better in that sense, right? So, but going back to kind of with the Milo thing, so we were saying that so many people talk about how this thing was a game changer and this thing was a game changer, and 90% of it is just BS, because how would you even know? And that's the entire industry, is making things sound better than they are and making people sound like they're going to get better results if they do this or that thing. This is why it is important to have large sample sizes in studies and that they're well powered. And even then, there's so many issues with so many studies. It's just crazy, especially in this industry. But yeah, I mean, this is something we talked about with Doug Brignoli, right? I mean, the guy has been lifting for probably 40 years. And he was on a podcast with Mike Isertel where he was like, oh, well, Mike, when I changed to this, I think it was like maybe doing higher reps or something like
Yeah.
that. And he was like, man, I was just growing like a weed. I just couldn't believe it. And it's like, what are you talking about, dude? You're in your 60s. You've been lifting for 40 plus years, and you're thinking changing to higher reps, you're not growing like a weed. I mean, it's just crazy to say that.
Yeah.
It's just totally nuts. But there's so many examples like that. So I agree. I think you kind of have to go by the literature and say, okay, well, the literature does favor higher volume. I mean, that is definitely true in most of the studies. And I don't think it's going to hurt. So I actually would err towards that, but I still think it's better to start lower, see how you do, make sure you're training with enough intensity, and then you could experiment over months, or even, I think most people aren't going to experiment over years, but month-long cycles, and say, okay, I'm going to try this increased volume and see how I respond. Give it a 12-week training phase. And if you can't detect in that time, I mean, at that point, you're really just getting into theory of just saying, well, maybe it would have worked over 2 years. So, okay. I mean, what am I supposed to say that? Who knows?
Yeah. I almost think that some of the best observations that you can make about yourself is just looking back at your training journey as a whole, and looking at the times when things went well, if you had some long, and maybe even more so the times when things didn't go well. Like if you really had just a long period where you feel like you did a lot of things right, but for some reason things just weren't going anywhere, then looking back, okay, what is the missing link there? Like for me now, if I look back at my training for the past year, I could blame it, some of it, on the training, because like I really, it's like things pretty much just stayed stagnant, completely, I would say. Sometimes I even think in some aspects I regressed, but some of it I could blame it on the training, but most of it, honestly, it's more just the lack of bulking, like the lack of like gaining more weight. That's what I would blame it mostly on. So that's one thing. And even with the low volume, so when people say I reduced my volume and things went better, I think, yeah, some of it is probably just pushing harder. Some of it could actually be that you were just overreaching chronically before. But I also think that a lot of it is just better like overview ability or better trackability for your training. Like it's just easier to systematize things, and there are less, like when I was doing really high volumes, like something always acted up. Like I always needed to modify things because, like, okay, a bit of elbow tendonitis. Now my shoulder is bugging me. Now I cannot even sit down because my back is so inflamed. And it's like, okay, like if I just do 10 sets instead of trying to do 20, like I just recover more easily. Like I don't need to sleep 9 hours a night or whatever to be able to do this. And yeah, like things can just work sort of okay instead of trying to do the optimal thing or the hardcore thing and not being able to recover from it. So like a lot of it might not actually have to do with like this is what you respond best physiologically or genetically. It's just that it's just more practical. So yeah, anyway,
Cool.
way too long again.
No. Let's see. This is kind of a long one. HXLO, this is a YouTube comment. Can you go straight from fat to bear mode without having to get lean first? If so, please explain. Let's see. If so, please explain. Situation. I wanted to know if I can skip the current process of losing weight all the way down to the recommended weight range before going straight to bear mode. I'm currently 296 at 6'3", Started 2 weeks ago at 320. Lost weight insanely fast after cutting all the processed shit and drinks from my diet, plus lifting daily so far. My question, what can I do to go straight to bear mode? I don't want to be straight and lean when I get to that 200 to 20 pound mark and just be lean. I want to get that bear mode body type so that I have wide shoulders already and I'm moderately tall. Is that something possible? Okay. So I personally, in that situation, would definitely recommend just getting lean because ultimately, sure, you got to do what you got to do, but I'll explain why. Uh, for one, if you're just new to lifting and you're 296 pounds, you are severely obese. So, from a health standpoint itself, you really should lose weight. And you're not going to be just lean, like shredded when you get to 220. I mean, I have a friend who's 6'3", who's been lifting for 10 years who is lean at 200 pounds. Okay. So I think that's just going to happen. And it's, unless you're really blessed genetically. Now, you did mention wide shoulders. Maybe you are more likely to have more muscle, but just saying. Secondly, it will give you a good idea of what that base level is. So the first time you cut down, maybe not everything's done perfectly, but you can see, okay, when I hit 220 the first time, this is what I look like. Frankly, if you can be 6'3", 220, even at moderate body fat percentages, like 15%, that's still a pretty big guy. I mean, I think Milo Wolf, who I just referenced, he looks, he's a pretty big natural lifter, and he is 6'2" and probably like 220. And again, he's been lifting for 8 to 10 years with, lifting well, good strategies and all that. So that's a pretty good size. As far as the actual question of can it be done, one thing I will put in that favor, and this is something I've mentioned before, is why I've always said, and I've now seen other people agree with me on this, that this whole idea of the P ratio and you got to cut down to, gain optimally, I always think was just kind of BS. Because I mean, think about who are the biggest, strongest athletes, right? They're pretty much NFL players, right? I mean, football players are some of the freakiest athletes out there. And I never once heard anybody say, well, you know what, like you're going to be a linebacker, you know what you should really do? Cut down, just get shredded first, because this way, when you bulk back up, then things are really going to change. Like that literally never happens. Most of these guys were big, overweight guys from the time they were in high school, and they've just lifted and been really strong throughout. And they have a ton of muscle mass. It was never told that they should diet down first. So I do not believe that. I think just being that high in body fat provides, I don't want to call it a surplus, but a surplus of calories. If you're not necessarily in a calorie surplus, but a surplus of calories for your body to assimilate muscle and do what it needs to do. So could you, in theory, just kind of maintain and recomp, and then eventually be a pretty hefty 296 with a lot of muscle? I'm sure you could. It's not the way I would personally want to go about it. It's not the way I would have a client go about it. I would say, suck it up, cut down. It's probably not, I mean, being as high in body weight as you are, it's really not going to take that long. But I mean, it could be, 6 to 12 months and diet down and then go from there is what I would recommend.
Can I ask you a question about this? Just curious of your opinion real quick.
Sure.
So on my video that I did on bulking, someone asked in the comments, and I had my own thoughts, but I'm curious of yours. If bulking is necessary, if you just stay at a reasonably high body fat, so let's say like 20-ish, and you just do that main gaining there, do you think that would be, say, as effective as someone bulking at like 14% body fat? What do you think?
Yeah, I wonder if it's the same person. Somebody asked a very similar question on my YouTube comments, and then a different username asked. So I think probably the same person asked an identical question on my Instagram, which is basically to say, well, I'm not a fan of this bulking and cutting. Why not just stay 18% year round and then gain there? I definitely do think that is way better than trying to do it at, say, 10%. Right. I think for most naturals, if you're trying to main gain at 10%, it's just not going to work for the vast majority of people. I think, as I mentioned here with the football players and this guy, if you were 30% body fat, there's no reason that you couldn't gain a lot of muscle and then kind of slowly recomp, especially if you're new to it. Right. Sure. Do I think it's as effective? I still think no. it's what I wish I had done kind of as a high schooler. I mentioned before, I spent a lot of time not trying to get lean. I was probably still bulking the majority of the year, but as a high school student and when you're growing and going through puberty, I would say do not cut. Just stay in a mild surplus the whole time because you have so much potential that you could stay, let's say, 18% body fat and just keep gaining muscle throughout that time. You might even lose a little bit of body fat, doing so, or just from a percentage standpoint, you'll be a little bit leaner. But do I think it's as effective as actually being in a purposeful surplus for months on end? I do not.
Yeah, that's basically what I said. So I think it would work a lot better than trying to do main gaining at a low body fat, which, to be fair, is not even against what, let's say, Greg Doucette is saying, although probably he would recommend you staying leaner than the body fats that would be viable for that, I think. But he's not saying main gain at 10%. But yeah, so I think that, let's say you're 20% and you're just kind of hovering around maintenance, that would be maybe your second best option after bulking if you really don't want to bulk. But I just must think that there is a difference. Like the energy that you get from actually eating the food is just more easily available for your body than the one that's on you, and like it has to be broken down first and whatever. So yeah, then we are seeing that the same way.
Yeah.
And I agree with you basically on everything that you said to the guy.
Okay.